My name is Peter Rolinson. I qualified in chemistry from the University of Manchester in the late 1970s. For many years since then, I've worked as a water treatment chemist, and for many of those years I've worked on oil production sites, looking at the water used on site and many of the issues faced by the oil industry as regards the potential for contamination of water supplies. This has given me some insight into many of these issues and many of the methods used to control these issues. I don't believe that fracking is the best way forward. The reason I say this is that I do have concerns that fracking will cause potential water contamination. Water in the East Yorkshire, as anywhere else in the UK, is an extremely precious resource. Even more so in East Yorkshire. Most of the drinking water comes from one very large aquifer. This is different to other parts of the UK. Over in the western half of the country, most of the drinking water comes from surface water sources such as rivers and lakes, etc. For instance, much of Manchester gets its water from the Lake District. In East Yorkshire, most of the eastern half in Britain in general, we don't have large surface water supplies. The water comes from underground sources referred to as aquifers. In East Yorkshire, it's one extremely large aquifer which stretches from Bridlington in the north out to Market Wheaton in the west, all through the towns of Beverley down into the northern parts of Hull. So any contamination, even slight contamination of this aquifer, could cause major issues for a large population. All oil exploration will involve drilling down through the aquifer. As the oil or gas is released, there could be the potential for organic chemicals to be released into the aquifer, particularly chemicals such as methane, benzene, toluene or xylene, albeit in very low concentrations. This would be bad enough, but Yorkshire Water, any water company, are duty bound to chlorinate the water. If they didn't, there would be quite nasty bugs growing in the water which would cause all sorts of problems. Once Yorkshire Water chlorinate the water, there is the potential for reaction between the chlorine disinfectant the company puts in and the organic chemicals. This reaction could lead to potentially very harmful chemicals such as chloroform, carbon tetrachloride, trichlorophenol being formed in the water. The gas that may be down in the shale is methane, CH4 methane. If that reacts with chlorine, the chlorine will replace the hydrogen and form carbon tetrachloride, one of the constituents of dry cleaning fluid. Do we really want dry cleaning fluid in our drinking water? I don't think so. One of the other contaminants could be the reaction of chlorine again with methane to form chloroform. We all know about chloroform. The list is endless. Chlorine will react with any organic contaminant in the water, react very, very quickly, and that process is irreversible. It won't go away if you leave the water standing. You couldn't take a glass of water, say, okay, I believe it's contaminated, just leave it on the side and it will go away. It doesn't happen like that. The water treatment companies would need to measure it, determine the level of contamination and undergo a very time-consuming and costly procedure to get rid of them. I was involved in an incident in Bradford some years ago where urban contamination of the water supplies led to high levels of the THMs in the water supply and led to a large area of Bradford being without their normal water supply for some months, which cost a lot of time and a lot of effort in the clean-up procedure. My concern is that if fracking takes place at any site, not just Crawberry Hill, not just West Newton, at any site, the potential for contamination of the aquifer is increased. But there is a risk that if there are serious fractures, even small amounts of methane, toluene, xylene, phenols, benzenes, all very noxious chemicals, could then seep into that aquifer and react with the chlorine that the water companies are putting in, and we have the result that we have excessive levels of trihalomethane and a very dangerous situation. It is vital that we maintain the integrity of the aquifer. We cannot afford the slightest risk of contamination of this vital water supply for East Yorkshire. We don't have alternative water sources. As I said before, the aquifer is a very large aquifer, one of the largest in the UK, and is our only main source of drinking water supply. If we do get these chemicals in the water, it would take years to clean up, and the potential risk would remain as long as fracking continues. Certainly air pollution, if they're flaring off from a fracking site and you've got crops in the field just downwind, I wouldn't want to eat those crops. Could be a major problem. Having worked on oil processing sites, sulphur is a great enemy of oil processors. All oil and gas deposits will contain elemental sulphur to some extent. Once this is released into the atmosphere, you've got the potential to form chemicals such as sulphur dioxide, which is essentially the product behind acid rain, or more interestingly, hydrogen sulfide, the bad egg gas. Even at the exploratory phase, it would involve large volumes of gas being flared off. As with any burning, if you had a bonfire, you think of the contaminants coming out of a normal garden bonfire. This is much, much greater potential. So these contaminants will be in the air. If the wind is in from its normal direction, westerly direction, those contaminants will be pushed over the westward down into Beverley. It is highly likely that people in villages such as Bishop Burton, the western edges of Beverley, will be able to notice a distinct smell in the air. If one surface water area gets contaminated, it is much simpler to look at an alternative source. That won't be the case if it's the aquifer. Once it's in the aquifer deep down, it would be a nightmare to clean up. If there's air pollution, it will spread over a very, very wide area. If fracking goes ahead, there will be a considerable number of wells in a very small area. And even if it's 5% of failures, let's say there's 100 wells in East Yorkshire, which I think is a conservative amount. If it's just 5%, that's 5 wells into this sensitive aquifer. We don't want one well failing, never mind 5. So for the oil companies to say most of the wells will be fine and acknowledge there will be a few well failures, that's just not acceptable. We can't allow that in this very, very sensitive water area. I can't emphasise enough that if the contamination occurs, it could be a disaster for the people of East Yorkshire. I think with the potential contamination of the water, the air pollution, the transport, the lack of economic benefit, I don't think fracking should be considered in this country at all. There must be a reason why France, Bulgaria, I believe Germany, many states in the USA have banned it. There must be a reason. Things like this don't get banned just on a whim. People must have looked at it very closely and said, it's not for us. I don't think it should be for the UK either.